The repair bay smelled of burnt metal and old lubricant, a familiar scent to James Carter, a human engineer working on the remote asteroid station of Zida 9. The station wasn't much. A rundown outpost used by travelers, smugglers, and anyone who needed a quick fix before heading back into space. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home for James, who had a knack for fixing things no one else could. Today, however, something unusual happened. A damaged alien ship had limped into the docking bay, its hull scorched, thrusters misaligned, and energy core flickering dangerously. The vessel was unlike anything James had seen before, sleek, with an organic design that almost looked alive. But what caught his attention wasn't just the ship. It was her. Standing beside the craft, arms crossed, was a tall alien woman with violet skin and piercing golden eyes. She wore a battle-worn suit of black and silver armor, with scratches that told the story of countless fights. Her long silver-white hair was tied back in a loose braid, revealing sharp, predatory features that made her look both fierce and elegant. James had met aliens before, but something about this one was different. She wasn't panicked or desperate like most stranded travelers. She stood with an air of authority, as if she expected the universe to bend to her will. He wiped the grease from his hands onto his work jumpsuit and approached her cautiously. "You need help with that?" James asked, nodding toward the smoking thrusters. The alien woman turned her gaze toward him, studying him as if trying to decide whether he was even worth speaking to. Then, after a moment, she spoke. "You are the mechanic?" she asked, her voice smooth yet commanding. James nodded. "I prefer the term engineer, but yeah, I fix things." She exhaled sharply, almost as if she found the situation frustrating. "Then you will fix my ship." Now, James raised an eyebrow. He had dealt with demanding customers before, but this one seemed to think ordering him around was normal. "Sure," he said with a casual shrug. "But first, what happened to it?" The alien hesitated for a moment before answering. "Pirates. My engines took heavy damage during the fight. I escaped, but my core is unstable." James whistled low. "A failing core. That's not just a quick repair. You're lucky you didn't explode before reaching this station." She frowned. "I do not rely on luck." James smirked. She was stubborn. That much was clear. But that wasn't a bad thing. Stubborn people survived in this galaxy. "All right, let me take a look," he said, grabbing his toolkit. As James examined the ship, he quickly realized this was no ordinary vessel. The technology was advanced, far beyond what most species used. The energy systems were strange yet efficient, the thrusters sleek but powerful. He glanced back at the alien woman. "This ship, it's real Vana tech, isn't it?" She stiffened slightly, then nodded. "You recognize it?" James chuckled. "I've never worked on one before, but I've heard stories. The real Vana don't let outsiders near their ships. They're warriors, not mechanics." She narrowed her golden eyes. "You know much for a human." James shrugged. "I pay attention. Comes in handy." For the first time, her expression softened, just a little. "My name is Vana, of the real Vana Elite Guard," she said, offering a short nod. "If you can fix my ship, I will ensure you are rewarded appropriately." James shook his head. "I'm not doing it for a reward. I just like fixing things." Vana frowned as if she didn't understand his answer. In her world, debts were always repaid, and warriors never accepted favors without compensation. The idea that James was helping her for no reason felt strange. Still, she didn't argue. James sighed, rubbing his hands together. "All right, first things first. I need to stabilize the core before it blows a hole in this station." He reached into his toolkit and got to work. Vana watched him silently, arms crossed, her golden eyes following his every move. She had assumed humans were weak, dependent on technology created by greater species. But this human, there was something different about him. He didn't hesitate. He didn't fumble. He was fast, efficient, and completely focused. Her people valued strength, but watching James work, she started to wonder if intelligence and skill were just as important. She would wait and see. For now, she let him do what humans did best: surprise the universe. James worked quickly and efficiently, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who had been fixing ships for years. His tools clanked softly against the metal hull as he removed damaged panels, reconnected loose wires, and rerouted unstable energy lines. Vana stood nearby, watching closely, her golden eyes never leaving him. She wasn't used to letting others handle her ship, especially not a human. But James was different. Despite being from a species known for its fragile bodies and short lifespans, he worked with a level of skill that rivaled even the best Rilvani engineers. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply analyzed the problem and solved it. Vana crossed her arms. "How do you know so much about ship repairs?" James smirked, not looking up. "Grew up on a mining colony. If something broke, you either fixed it or you didn't survive." Vana raised an eyebrow. "So, humans learn by necessity." James nodded. "Pretty much. We're not the strongest, not the fastest, but we adapt. We find a way." Vana considered his words. Adaptability. That was something her people respected. The Rilvani valued strength, but now she was starting to wonder if intelligence and creativity were just as powerful. James suddenly muttered a curse under his breath and stepped back from the ship's exposed core. Sparks flew as a warning light flashed red on the control panel. "Damn," he muttered. "This thing's running way too hot." Vana frowned. "Is it failing?" James shook his head. "No, but whoever built this didn't design it for quick repairs. If I can't cool it down, it's gonna overload." Vana stepped forward. "What do you need?" James blinked. He hadn't expected her to offer help. "Well," he said, thinking quickly, "I need a heat diffuser, but I doubt this station has Rilvani-grade parts." Vana narrowed her eyes in thought, then reached into a hidden compartment on her armor. She pulled out a small metallic device no bigger than a credit chip and handed it to him. "Will this work?" James took the device, inspecting it. His eyes widened in surprise. "Is this Rilvani cooling tech?" Vana nodded. "Standard issue for elite warriors." James whistled. "This is some high-end stuff. Why didn't you use it before?" Vana's expression turned unreadable. "I did not expect a human to fix what my own engineers could not." James chuckled. "Well, that's your mistake." Without wasting another second, he installed the heat diffuser, carefully adjusting the power flow. A few tense moments passed as the core whined and sputtered. Then the warning light turned green. Vana's eyes widened slightly. "You did it." James grinned. "Of course I did." She took a step closer, examining his work. The core was now stable, running efficiently despite the earlier damage. Even with Rilvani engineers, this kind of fix would have taken hours, if not days. Yet this human did it in minutes. Vana folded her arms. "You are impressive." James laughed. "Glad someone thinks so. Usually, people just see me as the guy who fixes things." Vana frowned. "Where I come from, skill is power. You may not fight with weapons, but your mind is just as deadly." James gave her a sideways glance. "That's probably the nicest thing an alien's ever said to me." Vana didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched him, as if she was seeing him in a completely new way. Finally, she spoke. "The ship is nearly repaired. What will you do when it's finished?" James shrugged. "Same thing I always do. Fix another ship, survive another day." Vana hesitated, as if choosing her next words carefully. "And if you had the chance for something greater?" James raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned, walking toward the control panel. "Nothing. Just thinking." James frowned. That was odd. He wasn't sure what she meant, but there was something in her tone that sounded almost uncertain. That was new. She didn't seem like someone who doubted things. Still, James let it go for now. He had a ship to finish fixing. Vana, however, had already begun to see James in a new light. For the first time, she wasn't just thinking about fixing her ship. She was thinking about the human who fixed it. And what that meant. Vana stood near the control panel, her arms crossed, deep in thought. The ship was almost fully repaired, thanks to James' unexpected ingenuity and efficiency. But now something else troubled her, something she hadn't expected. She was in debt to a human. Rilvani culture was clear. When a warrior received an extraordinary favor, they had to repay it with an equally great reward. Among her people, the greatest honor one could offer was a mating bond, reserved for those who proved themselves worthy. She glanced at James. The human was still busy with repairs, humming softly as he tightened a few bolts on the ship's exterior. He worked with confidence, completely unaware of the storm of thoughts inside her mind. Vana clenched her jaw. Could she truly offer herself to him? It was tradition. But James, he was different. He hadn't asked for anything in return. He had helped because he wanted to. That made him unlike anyone she had met before. She needed to make a decision. A sudden question. James wiped sweat from his brow and turned to her. All right, your ship's almost as good as new. Just a few more adjustments, and you'll be ready to fly. Vana nodded, then took a deep breath. It was time. I must ask you something, human. James raised an eyebrow. All right, shoot. She hesitated for a brief second, something rare for her. Then she spoke. What kind of reward do humans expect after proving themselves worthy? James blinked. Huh. She clarified, choosing her words carefully. In my culture, a great act of service demands a great reward. You saved my ship. You have shown skill and strength. In Rilvani tradition, such a debt must be repaid. James scratched his head. Well, humans don't really expect rewards for helping people. I mean, sure, a thank you is nice, but we don't keep a tally of favors. Vana frowned. That is strange. James shrugged. Guess we just see things differently. An unexpected offer. Vana studied him. She had thought humans were weak, but James had proven himself more than once, not just in skill, but in character. She had made her decision. Taking a step forward, she straightened her posture. Then, I will choose the reward myself. James crossed his arms, now genuinely curious. Okay, what do you have in mind? Vana took a breath, then spoke the words with absolute certainty. I offer myself as your mate. James is stunned. For a long moment, there was silence. James just stared at her, completely dumbfounded. You? What? Vana nodded seriously, mistaking his shock for hesitation. It is the highest honor in my culture. A warrior does not make such an offer lightly. You have shown great skill and intelligence. You have earned the right to claim me as your mate. James' brain stopped working. Hold on, wait a second, he said, shaking his head. You're telling me, because I fixed your ship, you want to marry me. Vana's brow furrowed. Mate, not marry. But yes. James rubbed his temples. He had been in some strange situations before, but this was a whole new level. Vana, listen. I appreciate the offer, really. But humans don't work that way. We don't just decide to be with someone over a single act. Vana looked at him confused. Then how do humans choose a mate? James let out a breath, trying to figure out how to explain relationships to an alien warrior. It takes time. We get to know each other first. We don't just jump straight into, well, that. Vana considered his words. She had always known Rilvani and humans were different, but she had never thought about relationships in this way. So, you are refusing. James quickly held up his hands. I'm not rejecting you. I think we should slow down. Vana narrowed her eyes. In my culture, refusing such an offer can be an insult. James groaned. Great. Now I've accidentally offended an elite alien warrior. Vana didn't say anything for a moment. Then she sighed, something rare for her. I do not wish for you to accept out of obligation, but I will not take back my offer. James nodded slowly. Okay, how about this? Instead of deciding now, why don't we just take some time to figure things out? Vana tilted her head. You propose a trial. James chuckled. Sure. Let's call it that. A new understanding. Vana didn't fully understand human customs, but she was intrigued. James had refused the easy path, something most warriors would never do. Instead of taking what was offered, he wanted to build something naturally. It was a strange way of thinking, but it was also interesting. She nodded. Very well, we shall see where this path leads. James let out a relieved sigh. Good. Now let's get your ship fully operational before anything else happens. As he returned to work, Vana watched him with new eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about battle, honor, or duty. She was thinking about James, the human who had not only fixed her ship, but had challenged everything she thought she knew. And she had a feeling this was only the beginning. James tried to focus on finishing the last repairs, but his mind kept drifting back to Vana's offer. She wanted to mate with him as a reward. That was the craziest thing he had ever heard. He tightened a few bolts on the engine, sighing. This has to be the weirdest job I've ever done. Behind him, Vana stood silently, watching him work. She was usually calm and composed, but now she felt something unusual. Uncertainty. Real Vana warriors were never uncertain. Yet James had refused her, not out of disrespect, but because humans had a different way of thinking. Instead of taking what was offered, he wanted to understand her first. It was a strange concept, one that intrigued her. A cultural divide. Human, Vana finally spoke, breaking the silence. James glanced back at her. Yeah. She hesitated for a moment before saying, Explain your way. James blinked. My way. Vana stepped forward. You say humans do not take mates in this manner. Then how do your people decide? James sighed, setting down his tools. Well, it's not a one-time thing. We get to know each other first. We talk, spend time together, figure out if we actually like each other. Vana crossed her arms. So humans hesitate. James shook his head. No, it's not hesitation. It's about building trust. A relationship isn't just about strength or skill. It's about understanding, caring for each other. It's not something you rush into. Vana tilted her head. So you are saying it takes time? Yeah, James said. Exactly. She thought about that for a moment, then nodded. Strange, but not without reason. James chuckled. Glad you think so. I was worried you'd challenge me to a duel or something. Vana smirked. If I had, you would have lost. James laughed. No argument there. An unexpected test. Vana's golden eyes studied him. Very well, human. If your way requires time, then I propose a test. James raised an eyebrow. A test. She nodded. I will stay on this station for a time. I will observe you, learn about you as you learn about me. If I find your way satisfactory, then we will reconsider my offer. James scratched his chin. So, like dating. Vana narrowed her eyes. Explain this dating. It's spending time together, seeing if we're compatible. Vana nodded thoughtfully. Yes, that is acceptable. James blinked. Wait, seriously. She crossed her arms. You wished for time. Now you have it. James sighed. Well, all right then. Guess I have an alien warrior roommate now. A warrior's perspective. As the night cycle fell on the station, Vana watched James from across the repair bay. She had never met a human like him. He was confident but humble, skilled but unassuming. Most males of her species would have accepted her offer without question. But James had challenged her thinking, made her consider a different way. Perhaps there was more to humans than she had believed. Perhaps there was more to James than she realized. As James finished packing his tools, he turned to her. "So, what now?" Vana smirked. "Now, human, we see if your way is truly better." James grinned. "All right, let's see where this goes." And for the first time in her life, Vana didn't know what would happen next. And she liked it. James wasn't sure how his life had taken this turn. One moment, he was just fixing the ship for a stranded alien warrior. The next, he was apparently in some kind of interspecies courtship ritual, one that he hadn't exactly agreed to. Still, Vana had decided to stay on the station to learn about him, and James wasn't going to turn away a potential friend, or whatever this was becoming. But as the days passed, he realized something. Vana wasn't just watching him, she was testing him. Every day, she found new ways to challenge him, as if she was trying to measure his worth in a way she could understand. And today was no different. A warrior's challenge. James stood in the station's training room, staring at Vana as she tossed him a wooden practice sword. He caught it, frowning. What's this for?" Vana smirked. "A test." James sighed. "Of course it is." She circled him, her golden eyes gleaming with amusement. "If you wish for time before accepting my offer, then I must know if you are truly worthy of it." James groaned. "You do realize humans don't settle relationships through combat, right?" Vana raised an eyebrow. "Then how do you determine strength?" James scratched his head. "We don't usually beat each other with sticks, if that's what you're asking." Vana chuckled. "Then consider this an exercise in understanding my culture." James sighed but held up the practice sword. He had no idea how he was going to win against a trained warrior, but he figured he'd at least give it a shot. Vana took her stance. "We fight until one of us yields." James nodded. "All right, let's get this over with." The fight begins. Before James could react, Vana lunged forward. She moved fast, her strikes controlled but deadly precise. James barely had time to block, the impact rattling his arms. "Okay," he muttered. "So you don't hold back." Vana smirked. "If I held back, it would not be a true test." James dodged to the side as she swung again, barely avoiding the hit to his ribs. He needed a different approach. He couldn't win by brute force. So instead, he used his speed and strategy. Rather than meeting her strength head-on, James focused on avoiding, deflecting, and outmaneuvering. He let her overextend her swings, made her chase him instead of striking directly. Vana's smirk faded slightly as she realized what he was doing. "You fight differently," she said. James grinned. "Humans adapt." A surprising victory. Vana lunged again, but this time, James was ready. He sidestepped at the last second, using her momentum against her. As she stumbled forward, he swung his practiced sword, lightly tapping her shoulder before stepping back. For a moment, there was silence. Then Vana blinked. She looked down at the wooden sword, then at James. "You landed a hit." James nodded, panting slightly. "Yeah, guess I did." Vana tilted her head, as if studying him for the first time. "You did not defeat me with strength." James smirked. "Nope. You used strategy." "Yep." Vana was silent for a moment. Then she smiled. Not a smirk, not a condescending grin. A genuine smile. "You are full of surprises, human." James chuckled. "Glad I could impress you." A shift in perspective. Vana stepped forward, looking at him with newfound respect. "I believed strength was the only measure of worth," she admitted. "But you have shown me that there are different kinds of strength." James shrugged. "Strength isn't just about hitting things harder. It's about knowing when to fight and when to think your way out." Vana nodded. "Perhaps. I have misjudged your kind." James smiled. "I get that a lot." She folded her arms. This test, it was not just about combat. It was about understanding you. And I believe I am beginning to. James raised an eyebrow. So, does that mean I passed? Vana smirked. For now. James sighed. Of course. You're going to keep testing me, aren't you? Vana's smirk widened. Naturally. James laughed. Great. Looking forward to it. And for the first time, he realized. Maybe this wasn't just her test for him. Maybe it was his test for her too. And something told him this was just the beginning. James sat on the edge of a workbench in the repair bay, rubbing his sore arms. The sparring session with Vana had been brutal, but strangely, it had also been fun. Vana, on the other hand, looked completely unaffected, as if she hadn't just spent the last hour trying to hit him with a wooden sword. She stood nearby, arms crossed, her golden eyes studying him again. You fought well, she finally said. James chuckled. Yeah, well, my arms disagree. She tilted her head. Pain is a sign of growth. James rolled his eyes. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind when I can't lift my tools tomorrow. Vana smirked but didn't argue. Instead, she took a step closer. You have earned my respect, James Carter. James raised an eyebrow. I thought fixing your ship did that. Vana shook her head. Fixing my ship proved your intelligence. Today, you proved your resilience. James blinked. Wow. I think that's the nicest thing you've said to me so far. Vana crossed her arms. Do humans require constant praise? James grinned. Nah, but it's nice to hear sometimes. A different perspective. Vana sat on a nearby crate, her expression thoughtful. Your way is different. I expected you to either accept or refuse my offer immediately. But you chose a third path. James nodded. Yeah, that's kind of what humans do. We don't just see two options, we find new ones. Vana considered his words. It is frustrating. James chuckled. Yeah. How so? She sighed. The real Vana way is clear, structured, honorable. A warrior's path is decided by their strength. You have proven your worth, yet you hesitate. James ran a hand through his hair. It's not hesitation. It's just different. For humans, a bond isn't about proving something once. It's about learning, growing, and choosing each other every day. Vana narrowed her eyes. That sounds exhausting. James laughed. Sometimes. But it also makes the bond stronger. She studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. Perhaps there is wisdom in your way. James raised an eyebrow. Wow, that almost sounded like an agreement. Vana smirked. Do not get used to it. A sudden threat. Before James could respond, the station's warning sirens blared. He jumped to his feet. What the hell? Vana's eyes narrowed sharply. Trouble. A voice crackled over the station's intercom. All personnel, brace for impact. Unidentified raiders approaching. James' stomach twisted. Raiders. Pirates, scavengers, and killers who preyed on smaller stations like this. Vana immediately moved toward the weapons locker, grabbing a pulse rifle. Stay close to me, human. James frowned. I can handle myself. Vana gave him a pointed look. You are skilled, but you are not a warrior. Let me fight. James exhaled, but didn't argue. She was right. He wasn't a soldier. But that didn't mean he was helpless. He grabbed his tool belt, quickly scanning for anything useful. If he couldn't fight like Vana, then he'd do what he did best. Fix things, sabotage things, and outthink the enemy. Working together. The station shook as raider ships docked forcibly, cutting through the outer airlocks. Vana stood ready, weapon raised. They will come through the east corridor first. James nodded. All right. If we seal off secondary access points, we can force them into a choke point. Vana smirked. So you do know strategy. James grinned. Told you, humans adapt. Vana gave him a single nod, Then let us show these raiders why they should fear us." As the doors burst open, James and Vana stood side by side, a human engineer and an alien warrior, ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time, James felt something shift between them. Not just understanding. Trust. The station trembled as the raiders forced their way inside. The lights flickered, and warning sirens blared across the halls. James gripped his tools tightly, his mind racing. He wasn't a fighter like Vana, but that didn't mean he was helpless. Vana, standing beside him with her pulse rifle ready, glanced at him. "Stay behind me." James smirked. "Not a chance." Her golden eyes narrowed. "You are not a warrior." "No," James admitted, "but I'm not just going to stand here while some low-life raiders try to kill us." Vana hesitated for a second, just a second, before nodding. "Then let's make them regret coming here." The first wave. The doors to the east corridor burst open, and a group of heavily armed raiders charged in. Vana moved instantly, her movements swift and precise. She fired controlled bursts of energy, taking down 2 raiders before they even had a chance to react. James, meanwhile, used his engineering skills. He grabbed a shock device from his tool belt and threw it toward a group of advancing raiders. The moment they stepped on it, a powerful electric charge surged through their armor, knocking them unconscious. Vana raised an eyebrow. "Not bad, human." James grinned. "Told you, we adapt." A desperate battle. More raiders pushed forward. The fight grew more intense, and James and Vana were forced to retreat down the corridor. James quickly activated the emergency lockdown, sealing off doors to funnel the raiders into a narrow passage. "All right, this should slow them down." Vana nodded approvingly. "Good. Now we finish this." She tossed James a small energy pistol. James caught it, eyes widening. "Wait, you're giving me a gun." Vana smirked. "Do not miss." James swallowed hard, but held the weapon steady. "I'll try." As the next wave of raiders came through, Vana fought fiercely, moving like a trained warrior, while James focused on disabling systems, cutting power to enemy shields, and using every trick he had to outthink them. Together, they fought as a team, covering each other, learning to trust each other completely. The final stand. The raiders were losing ground, but then, their leader stepped forward. A massive alien, nearly 7 feet tall, covered in heavy armor. He carried a plasma axe, and the moment he spoke, his voice was like thunder. "You are strong," he growled, looking at Vana, "but you fight alongside a weakling." James muttered, "Oh great, here we go." Vana stepped forward, her expression cold. "This weakling has done more than you ever could." The raider laughed. "Then let him prove it." He pointed his massive axe at James. James paled. What?" Vana tightened her grip on her weapon. "He does not need to prove himself to you." The raider smirked. "Then he is not worthy of you." James exhaled slowly. This was it, another test. Not from Vana, but from the universe itself. And he wasn't about to back down, outthinking the enemy. James wasn't a warrior, but he was smart. He knew he couldn't fight the raider directly. The guy was too big, too strong. So he used his brain. As the raider charged at him, James suddenly dropped to the floor, rolling under his massive swing. At the same time, he pulled a small plasma torch from his belt and activated it, slashing through the raider's belt and armor straps. The raider barely had time to react before his own heavy armor collapsed around him, making it impossible to move. James quickly aimed the energy pistol at his head. "So, do I pass?" The raider froze, realizing he had been completely outmaneuvered. Vana smirked. "Yes, human, you pass." With one final blast from Vana's rifle, the raider was knocked out cold. The remaining raiders, seeing their leader defeated, retreated immediately. The fight was over. A warrior's decision. James let out a long breath and sat down against the wall. Well, that was intense. Vana stood over him, arms crossed. You fought well. James smirked. Does that mean I'm worthy now? Vana tilted her head, then slowly nodded. You have proven your intelligence, your resilience, and your courage. She knelt beside him, looking directly into his eyes. And now, I choose you. James blinked. Wait, really? Vana smirked. You said humans take time. I have given you time. Now, I make my choice. James exhaled. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but deep down, he knew. He smiled. All right, Vana. Let's see where this leads. Vana nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, get up, human. We have much to do. James laughed. Yeah. Just give me 5 minutes. Vana chuckled. Very well. And as the station returned to normal, James realized he hadn't just repaired a ship. He had changed his life forever. And he had a feeling this was only the beginning of something incredible.